This situation keeps on getting crazier for the Dallas Cowboys. They're going to be in the market for a new head coach. At least all signs are pointing to that at the end of the season. So is a major hire incoming? A former player? A future Hall of Famer? Is he on the horizon for the Dallas Cowboys? We'll break that down and much more on this episode of Cowboys Digest. Welcome in, everybody, to Cowboys Digest. I'm your host, Peter Vryonis, and today we're going to be breaking down the potential hire of a future Hall of Famer, a former Dallas Cowboys player who I loved very much in his time in a uniform, but will that translate to coaching? Before we get into all of this, I want to let you know that 85% of you watching these videos are not subscribed to the channel, so go ahead and hit that sub button. It'd mean the world to me, and let's get straight into the video. Let's not waste any time, and this is what Jerry Jones had to say when he was asked if former Cowboys tight end Jason Witten could one day be an NFL coach. Yes. Without hesitation, yes, he has something that you can't draw up. He reminds me a lot of our tight end who is a head coach up there in Detroit right now. And of course, he's talking about Dan Campbell. Jason is very sophisticated when it comes to the understanding of football and all the nuances. But more important than anything, he really does understand the physical and mentality of being physical and that part of it. Without a question, he could become an NFL coach. He has extraordinary work ethic. He can be a top coach. And Jerry Jones comparing Jason Witten to Dan Campbell was the most predictable comment of the season. Now, as players, this is apples and oranges. Dan Campbell was a bit of a journeyman, a role player. Jason Witten is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer and one of the greatest tight ends of all time. He was a part of revolutionizing the position, and despite maybe not the great athleticism that we see from a lot of tight ends today, he was so dynamic in the passing game. He was such a reliable target for Tony Romo, for Dak Prescott, and for all the quarterbacks that suited up for the Dallas Cowboys. He was the safety blanket for a lot of those guys. I loved Jason Witten as a player. He was probably my favorite Cowboy growing up as a kid. But he has no coaching experience at the NFL level. Something that separates himself from Dan Campbell. So I don't really know where Jerry Jones is drawing that comparison from. But to me, it seems a little bit far-fetched to be comparing those two. And this is the difference between Dan Campbell. He is a fiery, spirited character. Not something that we saw out of Jason Witten in his time with the Dallas Cowboys. Witten was more of a reserved guy, a leader by example. Whereas Dan Campbell, when he first got introduced by Detroit Lions, he was talking about biting off opposing players' kneecaps and doing whatever he can to win. And he started crying. He was getting emotional in a training camp speech with his Detroit Lions players. That's the kind of fiery attitude that Dan Campbell brings to the table. It's no disrespect to Jason Witten as a player, but I just don't see that being able to translate itself into a coaching acumen. I love Jason Witten, and he is a football genius for what he was able to accomplish, especially later on in his career when his athleticism started to decline. So he's a great player, one of the smartest Cowboys that I've ever seen. And in fairness to him, never really got caught up in the circus that was the Dallas Cowboys. Jerry Jones loves to make it about himself. He loves the brand of Dallas Cowboys. But Jason Witten never really bought into that. He was quiet about his business and just got the damn job done on the field, which could be a very positive thing, actually, if you think about him in a head coaching role. Maybe he's not going to take all of that crap from Jerry Jones, but at the end of the day, when he's the one signing your paychecks and when he wants his fingerprints all over this roster, could get a little bit tricky if you start to challenge that hierarchy there if you're Jason Witten. And this is the thing that I wanted to bring up here. This is Dan Campbell as a player. You could see a journeyman, of course, who's been on a ton of different teams and didn't really stick at one location for a very long time. Obviously was with the Cowboys for a couple of years there. But his coaching career, he started in 2010 with the Miami Dolphins as a coaching intern, and he worked his way up. He was a tight ends coach in Miami, interim head coach in Miami for just a little bit. Then the New Orleans Saints, he was the right-hand man for Sean Payton for the better part of 5 years. So that just goes to show you that it's not necessarily a given that you're going to be a great head coach if you were a former player. It's not always a translatable skill, and a lot of the greatest coaches that we do see in the game are not former players or were not great NFL players to a certain degree. So he was the right-hand man for Sean Payton for 5 years, assistant head coach and tight ends coach, and then he finally gets introduced as the Lions head coach after 11 years in the National Football League, just chipping away and grinding and earning each and every stop that he achieved along the way. So that is the difference between Dan Campbell and Jason Witten when we're comparing coaches. But if you look at Jason Witten's playing career, obviously a lifetime Dallas Cowboy, apart from that one season with the Las Vegas Raiders in 2020, where he started 7 games and played pretty much every single game for them. So he was one of the more dynamic tight ends that we've ever seen in the National Football League, a 4-time All-Pro, 2-time first-team All-Pro, an 11-time Pro Bowler. This guy is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer when he is first eligible, and I cannot wait to see that induction. But I don't know if him becoming the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys is the right fit. I can see Jason Witten being a fantastic coach, but I think what the Cowboys need is someone seasoned, someone that has worked his way up. A name that I keep hearing is Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. I would love to see that personally. I think Ben Johnson is a football genius, and he would be the perfect man for the job for the Dallas Cowboys. But that's going to cost, and a lot of teams are going to go after him at the end of the season because he's arguably the biggest candidate on the market in terms of head coaching. So I don't know if that's really a realistic proposition for the Dallas Cowboys to go out and get Ben Johnson to be their next head coach. It would have to be as a head coach. It would not be as an offensive coordinator. And I think Mike McCarthy senses that the clock is ticking on his time in Dallas, and he's already preparing for his next move or even retirement at this point. He's got a Super Bowl ring. He's one of the more accomplished head coaches in the 2000s. I think maybe he senses that it's time to hang it up. That's a realistic possibility that Mike McCarthy is definitely weighing right now. So I think it's going to be time to move on. I think it'll be best for both sides, for Mike McCarthy and for the Dallas Cowboys, if they were to find somebody else this offseason. And the short list, I mean, it's fine. You have Kellen Moore, of course, the former offensive coordinator, who is doing a pretty good job right now in Philly. You have Marvin Lewis, former Bengals coach, who we've been hearing about a little bit. Bill Belichick, I think, has been lobbying for this job for the better part of a year now, and Ben Johnson, of course. So, or you could even go, you could even hire the defensive coordinator from the Detroit Lions. I think it's time for the Cowboys to make a move and to find the best next thing that they can do in the coaching, in the head coaching position, because the time is starting to tick here. This season has gone from bad to worse. They're 3-6. Most likely going to be 3-7 after another Monday Night Football crushing at the hands of the Houston Texans. And Jerry Jones doesn't really seem to care. They're all in, but AT&T Stadium is sold out every single weekend when they play there, despite them being winless at home this year. They had the Jake Paul-Mike Tyson fight, which was an absolute joke, if I may add. I know this is not a fighting podcast, but what a farce that was to the game of boxing. And I'm sure a lot of you that have made it this far into the video can attest that that was pathetic and that it was more so of a gimmick. The fight before that between Katie Taylor and Serrano was the fight of the night. That was fantastic, and shout out to those two ladies for putting on a wonderful show for us. But yeah, Mike Tyson, Jake Paul, no thank you. And I knew that it was going to be that way, but like an idiot, I still watched, as we all did, because Jake Paul just gets people to watch his fights, even though they're always staged. Anyways, let me know what you guys think of Jason Witten potentially becoming the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, and what you thought of the fight last night at AT&T Stadium. Was that the best? Was that the most amount of fight that we saw from a sporting event in AT&T Stadium this year? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Go Cowboys.